The train of bad news continues from within the Republican Party for Trump. Maryland just held its presidential primary, which should be a nothing burger of a story. Trump's last primary opponent, Nikki Haley, dropped out over 2 months ago. He should be on cruise control here. And yet, Trump managed to lose about 20% of the primary vote to Nikki Haley in the Maryland Republican primary, who, I should remind you, dropped out over 2 months ago. And bear in mind, Maryland is a closed primary state, meaning that you need to be affiliated with a party, meaning these Republicans who voted in the primary need to be Republicans before you can cast a ballot in that party's primary. So these were true Republican voters, and about a fifth of them came out expressly to register their dissatisfaction with Donald Trump. If that is not a blinking red light, I don't know what is. And let's be clear, this is a long-time recurring theme now. Just last week, Trump surrendered a massive 22% of the vote to Nikki Haley in the deep red state of Indiana, garnering only 78% of the vote himself, despite being the only candidate in the race. And that was just 2 weeks after Trump was dealt a similar blow in the swing state of Pennsylvania. Nikki Haley had dropped out 6 weeks prior at that point, and yet still Trump only managed 83% of the vote, while Haley took 17%, or about 160,000 voters in total. That is especially bad in that state of Pennsylvania, considering Trump lost PA to Biden in 2020 by 80,000 votes. Far from making up that ground, he shed double that from within his own primary base. In fact, this has been the story of the primary season thus far. Trump managed only 51% in Iowa, 54% in New Hampshire, 60% in South Carolina, 33% in DC, 68% in Michigan, 46% in Vermont, 79% in Ohio. Trump may frame himself as the second coming of Christ from within the GOP, and Republicans may point to all the polling in the world to try and bolster that claim, but when actual human beings cast actual ballots, we keep getting the same story. Donald Trump is weak, and his voters are rejecting him, even and especially among registered Republicans. In fact, all signs point to the fact that it's only likely going to get worse. According to the latest Reuters Ipsos poll from a few weeks back, when Republican voters were asked if they would vote for Trump if he was convicted of a felony, 24% said they wouldn't, which is a huge number of voters, especially in a party whose identity is solely predicated on allegiance to their God King. And now that this New York trial has begun, the possibility of a conviction is suddenly very real, along with the consequences that would come with it. If that's not a warning sign for Trump, nothing is. All of which underscores the serious problems that Trump's campaign is contending with right now. Not only does his performance highlight his pattern of weakness within his own base, not only does it undermine his perceived strength that he's some master politician who can't be beat, but most importantly, Nikki Haley, even after her departure from the race, continues to identify hundreds of thousands of voters that the Biden campaign can absolutely flip. Even 10 weeks after leaving, she's proven herself invaluable at leaving the Democrats a blueprint of exactly what persuadable voters are out there. I spoke with my Inside the Right co-host Tim Miller about how the Biden campaign should go about reaching those voters, and here's what he had to say.
Yeah, well, at a practical level, one big breadcrumb, we might have talked about this before, but it's important to just put a finer point on it, is the numbers among the voters that are voting by mail are like pretty astonishing about how pro Haley they are. Like the Trump, weird, mail fraud, ballot fraud, lies has now made it very easy for the Biden campaign to kind of to figure out which Republicans are gettable, because the MAGA crazies all vote in person.
Right.
Now,
Trump basically figured out a way to segment the gettable voters for the Biden campaign by just
exactly.
by forcing his own voters to only vote in election day, and then anybody else who's like got a modicum of reason or just wants to take advantage of the convenience, but like these non-MAGA loyalists, he's figured out a way to just segment those people and make them reachable to the Biden campaign.
Yeah, and that is a identifiable universe. You can find the addresses of the people that voted by mail, because that's the public record. So that is good news, just as a practical level for Biden people. I think the other thing is just, thinking about issues. What are the things that Nikki Haley differentiated herself from Donald Trump on? And one of them is an abortion, right? So the Biden campaign knows that abortion is a big issue for them. They know that there's a group of people they can reach on that. That's probably not the Haley voters, though. So the Haley voters have other issues. Foreign policy, commitment to NATO, opposition to Russia, and commitment to democratic norms, constitutional values. Those seem like the more issues that are going to work with that crowd. And so that, again, kind of provides a little bit of a messaging playbook and an additional batch of voters for Biden, who might not be as responsive to the other core kind of Democratic issue matrix.
And the Biden campaign, for its part, is wasting exactly 0 time in targeting them, debuting ads like this one.
Bird brain. I call it bird brain. Nikki Haley has made an unholy alliance with rhinos, never-Trumpers, Americans for no prosperity. She was sitting there like...
She's gone crazy. She's a very angry person.
She is not presidential timber. I don't need votes. We have all the votes we need.
She's gone haywire.
There aren't that many never-Trumpers anymore.
How do you bring these Nikki Haley voters back into the tent?
I'm not sure we need too many.
And it seems to be working. Here's one of my favorite ads that I'm sure you've seen before, showing former Republican and Trump voters flipping parties put together by a group called Republican Voters Against Trump.
I'm a former Trump voter.
I voted for Donald Trump in 2016 and 2020.
In 2020, I voted for Trump again.
I will never support Donald Trump.
I will not vote for him in 2024.
He's got so much baggage.
Trump is the biggest threat to our democracy.
He kept denying.
And he lost the election.
Donald Trump was responsible for the violence on January 6th.
He could have prevented it.
Trump talking about retribution.
Retribution and going after people is disrespect of our military.
The military people that he's disgraced.
91.
Criminal felonies.
4 different indictments.
He mishandled classified documents.
Taking documents.
Now his desire to do away with NATO.
Donald Trump talks about abandoning Ukraine.
He said he'll be a dictator on day one.
If he's going to be a dictator on day one, he's going to be a dictator, period.
That kind of stuff scares me.
Absolutely scares me.
A second Trump term would be worse than the first.
A second term for Trump
Would be far more extreme.
It is dangerous, outright dangerous.
I cannot support Donald Trump again.
I'd never vote for him again.
He'll never get my vote, ever, ever.
Just this past week, even Paul Ryan, the guy who's hackish enough to sit on Fox News' board, said he wasn't going to vote for Trump.
Character is too important to me. And it's a job that requires the kind of character that he just doesn't have. Having said that, I really disagree with Biden on policy. I wrote in a Republican the last time. I'm going to write in a Republican this time.
You're going to write in
a
Republican?
I don't know who yet.
In other words, despite the breathless coverage of Trump supporters fawning over their God King in a diner somewhere that gives the impression that he's invincible, clearly that's not the case, as evidenced by looking at these voters, these Republican primaries, and Donald Trump's own officials and colleagues. Now, with that said, the usual caveat applies. Do not allow Trump's weakness in these primaries to make you complacent. We have to continue working as if he's up by 20 points. That means we continue organizing, we continue supporting candidates and voter registration groups and get out the voter organizations, and most importantly, we continue working on our circles of people. We all have people in our families, in our friend groups, at work who aren't interested in voting, aren't interested in politics. Make them your responsibility. Find 1 or 2 or 3 people who wouldn't have otherwise voted and do your part to make sure they do. If you don't think that you doing that can have an impact, just remember the raft of tiny ways that Republicans are trying to ensure that you can't vote, with stuff like food and water bans at the polls. They are working hard to ensure that just a few less voters cast a ballot. That's how much of an impact you can actually have, even with these groups of 1 or 2 or 3 people. As for videos like this one, why cover these primary contests? Because it tells us an important message, that Trump is vulnerable and that we can win. Again, that doesn't mean that it's going to be easy, because it's not, and it's going to require work and patience and organizing. But even Republican base voters are broadcasting that Donald Trump is in trouble. So our job is to do whatever we can to put together our coalition of Democrats and independents and pro-democracy Republicans who recognize the abject danger posed by this guy. This isn't about purity tests right now, it is about strategy. So our strategy has to be expanding our tent as much as possible and ensuring that the people already in the tent know the stakes of this election. Biden is certainly not perfect, but the alternative is the end of democracy. We have an opening here. The voters of Maryland and Indiana and Pennsylvania and a raft of other states have told us as much, but it's our job to bring it home and save democracy. I've got a really exciting announcement. I've written a book. It's called Shameless. This book explores how Republicans have exploited their historical branding while attacking our democracy, how the media has proven itself a willful participant, and how Democrats can learn from this to rebalance the political scales and save our democracy. It has been a lifelong dream of mine to write my own book, and so I'd like to ask you to pre-order it by clicking the link right here on the screen. And if you buy within this pre-order period, your book is going to come with a signed nameplate. As you know, I've never had a single sponsor on my channel. I don't ask for money or anything like that. that, but if you're looking for a way to support me, this is hands down the best way to do it. So again, follow the link right here on the screen, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for pre-ordering Shameless. And as always, make sure to subscribe to see more of my content.